Patrick.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it's a tradition to have you or one of your colleagues here on stage. We had Mark last year, we had Boss 2 years ago. What's your position at Facebook? What do you do at Facebook?
Sure, but first of all, I'm Patrick Harris. I lead the global agency team at Facebook. I'm principally responsible for our agency partnerships around the world. But first and foremost, Phil, I just want to say a thank you. This is a tremendous opportunity to be able to attend the OMR conference, just to see the entrepreneurial spirit and the enthusiasm in the room. And you certainly set a new bar for what it means to throw a great conference, but also to throw a great party.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's talk Facebook a little bit. It's been quite a year for Facebook. You've been with the company for 8 years. The last year, I would assume, was probably the toughest that you had. Why are you optimistic about the future of Facebook?
Sure. So, I think I'd break it into a few parts. Having been with the company for the last 8 years, I would say that the company has transformed more in the last 1 year than it had in the previous 7 years that I was at the company. And I think that's happening for a lot of reasons, right? The challenges and the opportunities have been well documented. But at the same time, we've been really focused on how do we grow our community, how do we grow businesses. But increasingly, we've had to make sure that we're doing all of the right things as it relates to safety and as it relates to transparency. And so I think what you've seen from the company and from leadership is talking more about how we invite third parties into the conversation, whether you're an academic and you're a researcher, whether you're a government, whether you are a client or an agency. Because I think there's a lot of opportunities to really figure out what the rules of the road are for some particularly thorny topics that are addressing the industry. And I'd highlight 4, right? Like if you look at things like harmful content and content moderation, who draws the line and who is the arbiter between, say, free speech and hate speech? That's a really important topic, and I don't think Facebook should be alone in determining what is or what isn't. And we need to work with people, with governments, and with the right academic community to make sure we've got the right rules of the roads and standards there. Second is around integrity. And integrity I'm talking about as really integrity around elections. So I know there's a big EMEA parliamentary election that's coming up. We've had several significant elections that have happened around the world since 2016 in the US. And we've had to shore up and make sure we're providing more transparency about who's buying ads on behalf of political candidates, who is buying ads related to really specific causes. And we want to make sure, again, we're providing a depth of transparency around what's happening to avoid misinformation. And I know we've also been working here in Germany with organizations like the DPA to make sure we can really remove things like false news, and we can make sure that that democratic process around the world is protected. The third area is around data and privacy. So just giving people more control over their consumer data and making sure they understand why they're seeing certain ads or why they're not seeing certain ads, and just being more explicit about making sure those features are widely available. And the fourth area where we need a lot of help from other governing bodies around the world is really around the issue of data portability. Like, how are you able to take your data and then use it in other apps and services? And so, if you rewound 24 months ago or even 36 months ago, we just weren't having these types of conversations, and I don't think we were doing enough as it relates to our own responsibility across some of these tough issues.
I mean, despite those 4 aspects, I think it's probably fair to say that the public perception of Facebook has become much more critical in the past. Is it fair for you as a company to be exposed to that kind of a perception, or do you feel like that's a little bit of an unfair treatment?
No, listen, I think it's a responsibility, and I think it's one that we need to and we want to own. But at the same time, as we've addressed a lot of these challenges head on, and again, we can say all we want to the market, but the only thing that matters and the only thing that counts is what we actually do. But it hasn't prevented us from really focusing on innovation as well, and making sure that, like any company that's in the technology space, your most valuable asset and the currency that you most value is innovating. And a lot of times it's about how do you out-innovate yourself. And so when it comes to trust and transparency, I think there's a job to be done for the entire industry about how do we educate the public, how do we educate users, how do we provide better guidelines so people really understand what it means to be literate when you are on the internet and when you're using mobile devices.
What's the next big thing in the industry? I mean, I get asked that question quite a bit. People ask me what's happening in the ecosystem. What's happening in the ecosystem according to you?
Sure. So I think with lots of new technologies, there's always this focus on people thinking that these new technologies are going to have large impacts in the near term, and they sort of underestimate the longer term impacts and what you're going to see over, say, a 3, 5, or 7-year time horizon. So right now, some of the things that I'm really focused on and I'm excited about and how we partner with the ad community and folks in this room is first and foremost around stories. Stories as a format is not just unique to Instagram or to Facebook. Much like news feeds weren't something that was just native or organic to one particular platform. So the role of stories and the consumption and the growth around stories is something that really reminds me of the same consumer trends that we were seeing in newsfeed-based environments circa 2013 to 2015. And it's really interesting because, like with most new formats or most new surfaces and advertising opportunities, the consumer is always just way ahead of where marketers are, and I think that's a great opportunity. So stories is one. The second one is around messaging. There's an explosion in messaging and more one-to-one and one-to-few communications, and seeing some of the innovation that's happening across places like Messenger, Instagram Direct, but also WhatsApp. Last week at F8, we announced that we're allowing small businesses to upload some of their merchant catalogs into WhatsApp to make it easier to find your local small businesses. And then last but not least is really some incredible opportunities around video. And it's not just mobile-based video, but video in general. We're really excited about a new product that we've been testing in about 40 markets around the world called Watch. We've brought monetization to that product for the very first time. And so for me, it's those 3 big trends. And these are not new trends, but they're highly underpenetrated and underrepresented trends by the marketing community. Stories, messaging, video.
So somebody that came to OMR today, or is here at OMR today, how can they leverage stories? I mean, I think you prepared something on that, and then maybe you can give us some example on how to leverage stories.
Sure. So I'll just pull up a quick example. Like, this is a great example from BMW in Austria, and this was for the launch of the X2. And what you can see here is just really great 9:16 kind of vertical video formats where people get interested in the ad, and then we're able to retarget that same consumer that saw the ad with a lead ad that they might see later in a different session on Facebook. And what's really interesting, this is a very lightweight, kind of simple execution, but the goal for this campaign was actually to drive trial for test drives. But what it also did was what we observed was almost a 35% increase in ad recall on the stories format. And then the lead ad that then went to Facebook, where people would register to sign up for a test drive, this was actually their highest performing unit in terms of actually driving people into dealerships to go and test drive the new X2. So that's really cool. The other 2 examples I think are just interesting kind of formats. You see the Jägermeister example in the center, which really has, you'll see like cinegraphs that are here and people using these different creative treatments. What you also see on the right from TransferWise is just like really, really fast creative. And so how you communicate a message in a shorter period of time, but do it in a way that's really accretive to what consumers expect in this environment, to what they're used to seeing from their friends and their family, I think is really, really powerful. And this is an area where, again, the marketing community around the world is just behind where consumers are.
Okay, so shift your attention to stories is one takeaway. I want to come back to another thing that I mentioned this morning in my presentation. I mean, you are connecting the world through Facebook and through Instagram, through apps, and I made the observation that rage somehow is rewarded on social platforms. Not even like we know that for a long time from very strong opinions from the outskirts of society maybe, but also I think these days from brands of the middle, like in Nike, we've seen that, the Gillette. Then there's also the addictive behavior, fake news. There's a lot of things that are questionable, to say the least. What's your take on this? Is this, is that a problem?
So, as the father of a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old daughter, this stuff scares me as well, right? And I think social media obviously gets it gets a lot of attention in terms of, some of the failures or some of the things that are challenges and opportunities for societies as a whole. But I think when you also look at all of the opportunity and the good that it creates in the world, which is hard to find, good news headlines these days on a lot of topics. The thing I'm really proud of is what the organization continues to do for communities and for people around the world. So I'll give you just a few examples. Has anyone ever celebrated their birthday here on Facebook?
Yeah.
It's okay, you can raise your hand. But, Facebook birthdays and things like Facebook fundraisers have raised over $1 billion around the world for nonprofit charities. I think that's an amazing opportunity. When I think about things like Facebook groups, if you're a member of a really important group or a community that's coalesced around an activity or an idea or something that you really care about, those groups are really meaningful. I have a really funny story about, there's this group in London. They're called the London Lowriders, and no, they're not interested in cars. They're actually interested in those dogs. Dachshund, they almost look like little wiener dogs, right? And this community is unbelievable because they all found each other online, but they have these meetups where they meet in parks all over London and they get together and somebody's dog gets sick and that person can't afford to pay for the veterinarian, and the group comes together and foots the bill and pays for the veterinarian services. But what it's also done, which has been an unintended consequence, is if you think about hard topics, you can imagine living in London at the moment, trying to have a conversation with a regular stranger about Brexit, right? You are just not gonna have a good conversation because someone's got their view over here and someone has their view over here. The London Lowriders being connected through dogs and their community, it's unbelievable because it actually tears down the fabric of being able to talk about other topics and difficult topics. So I'm really proud of things like that. And in addition, I think the thing I'm most proud of is products like Safety Check. So if you've been in the unfortunate situation where you're in a place where there's been an earthquake, where there's been a terrorist attack, where there's been a typhoon or a hurricane, the opportunity to check in safe and get resources to people that can actually come and help you really quickly, and watching how communities coalesce around these things and help each other out is really powerful. But the other thing that I don't think gets enough attention or time is really around the 90 million small businesses that have presence. And I don't think we do a good enough job talking about how marketing actually drives growth, it drives jobs, it drives GDP, and we get caught up in this globalization conversation when we should really be talking about how these things can contribute to growth. And so for a person that's been at the company for 8 years, who's raising teenage daughters, who has a lot on my plate like everyone else in this room does, I wouldn't still be at the company if I didn't think that the good was far outweighing some of the challenges.
Okay, let's hope that is the future. Maybe to finish up one last question, I think we have something prepared for the last question as well, is what should we in the room here expect from Facebook in the future?
Sure. So there's been a lot of announcements over the last week. We had F8, which is our annual developers conference. Mark talked a lot about a privacy-focused future and what that means. I think what we're seeing is that consumers expect to be able not only talk to the town square like they did in Facebook historically, but also be able to talk to their living room. And what I mean by that is how they communicate with people in groups, the modes of communication that are enabled through things like messaging, especially with encrypted messaging, but also how they can continue to use the news feed to talk about things that they care about to wider groups of people. But the thing I'm most excited about, and one of the new areas that's emerging, especially off the Big Blue app, is Instagram. Any Instagram fans out there?
Yeah.
I hope there's a lot. But one of the things that we launched last week that's really exciting is this notion of Instagram shopping. And so for those of you that haven't seen it, this was a beta that we were doing with about 20 marketers in the US. And basically, this allows you to sort of shorten the distance between seeing a product that you love and going to that path of purchase. So with about 20 different beta partners in here from a lot of brands that you already know, this gives you the ability to go right from a click off of an ad, right to an opportunity to see the product catalog, and then be able to actually convert and buy. And then in addition to that, what we also launched last week at F8 was an opportunity for some of your favorite creators. The creator community is like a rabid, awesome community on Facebook with lots of followers, and we want to give those creators the opportunity, again, to promote a lot of the products that are meaningful to them and meaningful to their followers. And what's really interesting about this beta is that Adidas had their earnings, their Q1 earnings last week that they talked about, and their CEO said that they had a 40% increase in online e-commerce direct-to-consumer sales in the first quarter of 2019, and he attributed a lot of that success to all of the work that they're doing right now on Instagram Direct. So this is a forum, this is a medium where people are definitely more responsive to ads. They're definitely more interested in shopping. And so we're trying to create these experiences that, again, feel really authentic, but also get people closer to that path to purchase.
All right. Thank you for sharing this, for being here, for supporting us. I mean, you have to say Facebook, huge partner for us, very important pillar of what we do here. So thank you for being here, for doing this for us.
Delighted. Thank you very much.